I call Peter Lamb.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I, as with all the members of the House who've spoken so far, express my congratulations to the Honourable Member for Chester South and Edisbury. Much as my honourable friend was setting out, the member for Glasgow East was setting out in his speech, we are in Crawley an urban constituency. So on the plus side of that, I suppose I get to avoid the general bun fight there has been so far over who has the best rural constituency, as we undoubtedly have the greatest urban constituency. We're not necessarily known for our farms in Crawley, to be honest. We've got fairly tight boundaries around the town, but we do actually have farms in the town, which often surprises people because the safeguarded land between the urban area of the town and the airport is currently only usable as agricultural land. We're not allowed to build anything else there, which is a point I need to take up with ministers in due course to try and release that for some much needed economic and housing space.
On that point, will my friend give way? I thank the honourable member for giving way. Does he agree with me that it's vital having farms in a built-up setting to give that connection between those who perhaps don't have the good fortune of getting out into the countryside, to understand how crucial farming is to this country as a whole, but also, frankly, to be able to go about enjoying livestock in a responsible manner?
I would agree with my honourable friend. Having, I think, any form of green space in close proximity to people is vital to psychology. There is research which is showing, given that we're about to go on to discuss space industry soon, the research that has been undertaken by those involved in the space industry goes to show the huge psychological boost that green presents to people just in being physically in close proximity to these things. It is, of course, worth bearing in mind that farming itself, though, is not necessarily the best representation of natural England. And I do worry sometimes in this place that when we get into conversations around housing developments, all too often people get too obsessed with the notion that England is supposed to be a land of rolling green fields. The reality is that this country was densely forested. Areas which are open green fields have had to have substantial amounts of biodiversity removed to make them viable. And so with the government's housing programme, I very much support the belief that we should look at these as grave-built land or brownfield land on the basis that actually this is not what is natural England is supposed to look like. In fact, the new housing developments in many cases will have greater levels of biodiversity. But nonetheless, integrating farming alongside other forms of industry, I think, is an important part of developing well-rounded communities. I'm familiar with these farms in part because when I was a member of West Sussex County Council many years ago, not many years ago enough for my particular experiences of being a county councillor, but one of the investments that we undertook during that time was to buy one of those farms, which was viewed as being a fantastic idea on the basis that land would, in due course, be developed into a runway and would make an absolute killing out of it. And I regret to say that even if the DCO process comes forward right now, that will still be farmland. That is not where the proposed runway is. So that was another of the county's investments that's not really played out the way that they planned. I will.
Well, the National Wealth Fund, which is something that the government is focusing on, building, to be fair, on work carried out by the previous administration, has a real focus on helping local authorities make sensible investments. Would my honourable friend agree with me that given the various sagas of there's another one, there's Thurrock and Solar and interest rate swaps by Hammersmith and Fulham back in the day, that is a very sensible objective for the National Wealth Fund?
I am sure we'll be speaking to the bill which is the protection of livestock. Peter Lamb.
Fighting my way back to it, just to address the honourable member's point. Having been a local authority leader for quite some time, that the pressures on councils, if their income is being reduced in other forms, to make those other investments, they absolutely have to do that. But clearly many lessons have had to be learned from that, and I very much hope that it will provide far better opportunities for public money. But if members will please allow me to get back to the substance of the bill, I'll be proceeding with all due haste. Nonetheless, we are surrounded by fields, and consequently the provisions that affect these areas do affect my constituents. Within the constituency itself, though, livestock actually is based, and my experience around all of the issues addressed within this bill stems much more actually from one of the town's main parks, where we have the Nature Centre. It's actually just been rebranded as Tilgate Zoo, but it was for a long time, it was the Nature and Rare Breed Centre, where I spent many happy a year in various capacities. It's where I got married. That was a high point. It was where I was bitten by a turkey at the age of 2. That was a low point. I'm sure it all balances out in the long run in my head. I'm afraid we don't actually have any alpacas there or llamas. I'd love to get them. We're supposed to be rolling out new different country exhibits as time goes on, but I'm reminded that, of course, they're no laughing matter, alpacas and llamas. The Inca Empire never developed the wheel. The entirety of that empire was built off the back of alpacas and llamas. And as a result, they are an animal that's worthy of great respect. What they do have there is sheep or did have sheep and cows. And we had some pretty harrowing cases of what happened to that livestock at the Nature Centre. I mean, in one case, a sheep was just literally set on fire while still alive. And while clearly the bill does not directly deal with that, I think some of the mentality that goes into disrespecting these animals is worthy of note. But what we have done is we have very often, far more often than that, had dogs set on these animals, or at least people have not been in control of these, and we've eventually had to remove the sheep entirely from the publicly accessible areas on the basis of that. In fact, we went a bit further than that, because the local authority itself owns the park, and so consequently, in order to deal with this, it was not just around that area, but around the lake, the main lake in that area. We kept finding that cygnets and baby ducklings were being mauled by dogs that had come off leash, and so we took the decision to implement a PSPO that would mandate all dog owners to keep their dogs on leads around those areas to try and reduce the risk to other animals. I'll be honest and say it wasn't well received. We're really consulting on it now, and I suspect it probably still won't be desperately well received. And this, I think, cuts to the big problem around these issues, which is, people love dogs. They love their own dog. Their dog could never possibly do anything wrong. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, I'm certain that they are right about that. But there will always be situations with an animal where you're not going to be in control, where something happens, and as a result, others pay the price, whether or not that's people who are put at risk or where we do lose animals in these areas. And the experience is that, unfortunately, despite having voluntary provisions in these kind of areas, that is insufficient to the task to actually try and require people to keep their dogs under control. You need it to be pretty much all the case. You can't deal with the odd exception. I think it's really important, as a result, this bill does put in place provisions which will enable the police to act and to take appropriate action to be able to monitor and investigate and to resolve situations where this has taken place. And it's important, I think, that resource is put into place, that the law isn't just put in place. We have a habit, I think, sometimes that we will produce the regulations around these things, but if you don't allocate the resource, you're not actually producing any better outcome. And I think there is a big concern of mine in particular that if you create laws that you do not enforce, what you're actually encouraging in the long run is lawlessness. We should allocate or have sufficient regulation that we are prepared to enforce and capable of enforcing in order to maintain, I think, the value and meaning of the law to our constituents. Of course, it's not just about animal welfare. While the impact upon the livestock themselves is tragic when these incidents occur, this is fundamentally, and this is the point I was making to my honourable friend, it's a matter of economics as well. This is an industry, this is people's livelihoods. They operate, as we are now well aware from debates that have taken place in this place over the course of last year, on extremely tight margins. They cannot afford the kind of losses that this kind of abuse can have as an impact. And so it's important that you have systems of regulation in place that will enable that industry to operate effectively into the future. Because it's not simply about what happens to them. Agriculture is a matter of national security for all of us. The lessons of this we've had to learn as an island many times. I mean, as a country, we've always had to import some food from overseas. There's always been trade. I think back to the Neolithic age, we're importing a certain amount of herring from Scandinavia. But the impact upon society as a whole in World War II was driven very clear when the U-boats were able to disrupt the trade system with the Empire, and the impact upon convoys and sailors putting their lives at risk to ensure that people would be able to survive, and the efforts that this country made both at the time with the grow your own campaigns, but also the efforts that have been made since to try and create a large enough agricultural sector in the United Kingdom that will always be able to feed our population, with the development of buffer stock systems over the war to ensure that the market fluctuations didn't drive people out of business, and which continue to operate on some level to this day. As was driven home to us in terms of the impact upon our national security with COVID, and the level of focus which we gave to people working throughout the food distribution sector, designating them as key workers. And I think it's really regrettable that as a society we've rowed back from thinking and realising that people in these kind of logistical and retail roles play a far more fundamental role in our day-to-day ability to survive than many of the roles that in society we choose to promote. And we need laws which ultimately are going to support those in these industries to be able to thrive. So, in summary, I would agree with the proposal set out in this bill, and I've attempted to get through my speech at the fastest possible pace to make that point.